In today's video, we're going to be playing Matchmaker for every single UFC fighter on the main card of the Saudi Arabia Fight Night. Just going through who I think they should be booked next, who their next fight should be, and then just giving my reasoning. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts also. Let me know what you think about these potential matchups. And let's just dive right into it. We got to start off with the winner in the main event, Robert Whittaker. I think he has a few different options here. I think potentially dream scenario for the fans, we would get a number one contender fight between him or Sean Strickland. And then I also think he's live to just potentially fight for the title, whether that's next or, in another title fight. But him versus Sean Strickland, I think, would be the dream if you can get it as the co-main event at UFC 305 in Perth. This was just an insanely impressive performance from Robert Whittaker. First off, he's a BMF for taking the fight in the first place. This was not, taking on some easy opponent. This was like almost worst case scenario. You get a really tough opponent who doesn't have the name, doesn't have the hype. If you lose, everyone's going to, dump on you. You lost to someone who's unranked. If you win, you don't really get the same respect because people are going to say, oh, they weren't ready, it was short notice, all of this stuff. He did what he needed to do, got a very, very quick finish. I think his first finish since 2017. So good on Robert Whittaker. It seems like at this point, he has a decent chance to be the backup fighter at UFC 305. And we've seen, within the last year, 2 years, if someone's the backup fighter, they kind of have that inside shot to get in the next title fight. So, maybe he would be next for the winner of Adesanya DDP. It seems like him and Sean Strickland are like the clear two top options. But I honestly don't feel like either guy has stamped it. There seems to be this, idea in the MMA community that like Sean Strickland has this title shot locked up. And I think he has the advantage just because his fights with Izzy and DDP were kind of more compelling, right? Whittaker has lost twice to Izzy. He got finished by DDP. Strickland had a close fight, split decision against DDP, had a dominant win over Israel Adesanya. But like once Sean Strickland lost the belt, one win over Paulo Costa, that's not crazy. Whittaker's coming off also a decision win over Paulo Costa, a knockout over Ikram. And when you actually look at what Robert Whittaker had to do after losing the belt the first time, pretty sure he had to beat Darren Till, then I think it was Jared Cannonier, and Kelvin Gastelum. So he had to stack 3 really high caliber wins to get that next title shot. We'll see if Sean has to do the same. So I think, this fight could settle that number one contender spot. If it doesn't, the UFC will probably just pick, do they want to go with Sean Strickland for the next title shot? Do they want to go with Robert Whittaker? I personally just don't think there's a wrong answer. But if they don't go with him and, he's the backup, they have Sean Strickland fight the winner, I think if you're Robert Whittaker, you kind of just go on vacation. I don't think he should be taking another fight. It would probably turn into like a Nasruddin Imavov matchup. But even there, I feel like you're risking it for no reason. There's not another top contender. I kind of feel like he could just sit on a spot, similar to what Sean Strickland's doing right now. Now, the loser in that main event, Ikram Aliskerov, he's kind of in this unique spot because he had the opportunity to make a crazy splash, jump up to pretty much the top of the middleweight division, and it didn't work out. So it's kind of weird because it's like he just fought the highest level guy. He got finished, but it's also like you don't want to, dock him too much because he just fought, a very tough Robert Whittaker. So I think in his next matchup, I'm going to go with Gerald Meerschaert here. I think he probably shouldn't be getting a ranked opponent after a loss. Maybe he was pushed a little bit too fast. Maybe he just got caught. I do just think Gerald Meerschaert kind of makes sense here as the next step. He's coming off a submission win over Brian Barberena. He's also kind of just been willing to take on these prospects in his career. We know he was Khamzat Chimaev's, I think, 3rd fight in the UFC. Chimaev went through him pretty easily, but he stepped up. He took that fight. No one really wanted that Khamzat matchup. So I think Ikram versus Meerschaert makes some sense. Now looking at the co-main event, Alexander Volkov with a great win over Sergei Pavlovich. And I guess his next fight should be against Cyril Gane. The heavyweight division right now is just a disaster. I could make a whole video on that. You have Tom Aspinall defending the interim title at UFC 304. We still don't have a John Jones-Stipe Miocic matchup. I still have pretty much zero interest in that John Jones-Stipe fight. It should be Jones-Aspinall. I don't know why we're messing around here with, Stipe, 3+ year layoff, coming off of getting knocked out. It doesn't make a ton of sense. And then when you're looking at Tom Aspinall, if he defends that interim title against Curtis Blades, you can't imagine he's going to then defend it a second time. But I feel like for Volkov, under normal circumstances, he's probably earned a title shot. 4 straight wins, a very solid win against a pretty much marauder in Sergei Pavlovich, who's run through everyone except Alistair Overeem and Tom Aspinall. So I think personally, if I were managing him, I would probably tell him to take a layoff because even if he beats Cyril Gane, he is still pretty far away from another title shot. unless Jon Jones beats Stipe and, just walks out of there and retires. Because if Jon Jones is sticking around, that Jon Jones-Stipe fight's going to happen probably late in 2024. Then you have the Jon Jones or potentially Stipe-Aspinall fight, which is probably, not going to be early on in 2025. I don't think it makes a ton of sense for Volkov to fight right now, but if he wants a fight, I think the Ciryl Gane rematch makes a lot of sense, potentially headlining the Paris fight night. And then for the loser of that co-main event, I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich taking on Jailton Almeida. It kind of seems like the only matchup here at heavyweight that makes sense for Sergei. Like maybe the Tybura Spivak winner if he wants to wait. I think that fight is taking place in August. Maybe he will wait, took some damage here, so I do think the winner of that one could make sense for him. This was just tough for Sergei. He got pieced up for 3 rounds. We've never seen that happen to him. He's never left the first round in the UFC. He's been finished, but we haven't seen him go 15 minutes without being able to, even hurt his opponent. For Jailton Almeida, he's coming off a dominant win over Romanov. Should be fighting up in the rankings at this point. Stylistically, I think it's interesting. We haven't really seen Sergei's takedown defense tested since his UFC debut. He went up against Curtis Blades, just ran through him, but Curtis didn't throw a ton of the wrestling at him in that matchup. It was a pretty quick fight. So can Sergei defend those takedowns? We know Jailton Almeida, he is going to be shooting no matter what. He's not going to mess around on the feet. So if he can defend him, I think that'll be interesting. And then if he can defend him, what can Almeida bring to him on the feet? So I think it's a fun stylistic matchup and probably the only fight that makes sense right now. And then looking at the next fight, Kelvin Gastelum gets the win over Daniel Rodriguez. And not to crap on Kelvin Gastelum after a win, but this was just an embarrassing fight week for him. He asked for the fight to be bumped up 15 pounds the day before weigh-ins. I understand things happen in camp. Sometimes you miss weight, but there's no way you're telling me that he didn't know he was going to be coming in way over, fight week, even a few weeks before. You have Daniel Rodriguez, who the day he's getting informed of this is already under 180 pounds, and the dude he's fighting can't even get to 180. It was terrible. Then, of course, he goes out, has really strong-looking cardio, didn't have to suffer through a real weight cut, and then to just seal it, he, is laying on Daniel Rodriguez, controlling him in the 3rd round. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if he's cut. He probably has a pretty decent salary here. Dana did not seem happy after the fight. But if he does get another fight, it has to be up at 185. And I don't think they're doing him any favors with his matchmaking. The 170 experiment needs to be done. He's clearly just not disciplined enough to do it. So I think his next matchup should be Gregory Rodriguez. RoboCop is 6-2 in the UFC. Coming off of back-to-back wins, he has finished 4 of his last 5 opponents. Super powerful. Pretty durable guy, solid wrestling, and I think he's like one big name fight away from getting a shot at the top 15. So I think Gastelum versus RoboCop makes some sense. And then unfortunately, the loser of that matchup, Daniel Rodriguez, I think Brian Battle makes sense as the next opponent. D-Rod really did get screwed here. It seems like he was paid well, got a chunk of Gastelum's purse, got a new, I think, 6-fight contract. Hopefully those fights are guaranteed because they can sign for 6 fights, but if the UFC can cut you at any point, is it that great of a deal? Unfortunately, now he's 3 losses in a row. Gastelum, Ian Gary, Neil Magny. Definitely not bad competition, though. Probably needs to take a little bit of a step back in the ranks. Brian Battle's 5-1 in the UFC. Think he's due for a step up in competition. Fun striker. I think this is a nice matchup here between these two. And then shifting over to the Sharabullet fight. Sharabullet picks up the win. Bo Nickel called him out after the fight, and I'm actually totally cool with this matchup. You have 2 guys with a lot of attention. I think you could make the argument both aren't quite ready for that top 15, so you get him a notable name. If you put Bo Nickel against some, random fighter again that the casual audience doesn't know, he's going to get a lot of hate. People are going to go after him. If you put him up against Shara, people are going to think this is a pretty legit test, and I think both guys can prove things in this matchup. Sharabullet's takedown defense looked very suspect in his UFC debut. Bo Nickel, how does he fare going up against someone who truly is dangerous on the feet, can put him out? So I think both those guys can kind of answer those questions. The only thing that I think could hold this fight back, maybe the UFC wants to keep building these guys separately, but also if Sharabullet can't come to the United States to fight because of his eye, I don't know if that's a guarantee at this point, but if he can't come to the US, I don't know if Bo Nickel's like going to like Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia to fight him. So that could be a roadblock, but Bo Nickel called it out. Sharabullet seemed to be interested. Don't think, that's a terrible one there. And then the loser of that matchup, Antonio Trocoli, kind of a weird spot, because he was coming in, making his UFC debut. probably wouldn't have been on a main card if it wasn't for Sharabullet. So I think his next matchup should be Julian Marquez. You got to respect him for taking this one on short notice. In my opinion, he didn't show a ton here, so I'm not, like trying to get him back in there with like some top prospect or anything, unless you're just trying to feed him. So I feel like any like debuting middleweight coming off the Contender Series, or someone who's struggling in their first few fights in the UFC also could make sense here. I just went with Julian Marquez. He fought recently. He's lost 3 fights in a row, but he probably, could get one more shot just because his fights are pretty exciting. He's kill or be killed, always in there to scrap. So if Marquez is not getting cut, I think this Trocoli matchup could make some sense for him. And then shifting over to the final matchup from the main card, Volkan Oezdemir with a vicious knockout win over Johnny Walker. I think a next, realistic step here is Alexander Rakic. Oezdemir was actually Rakic's first loss in the UFC. It was a split decision, close fight. I think the rematch just kind of lines up here. Oezdemir should be ranked at 7, coming off the win over Walker. Rakic is ranked at 5. Oezdemir should be fighting up. Rakic should be fighting back after his loss to Yuri. I think it lines up pretty well here. I also wouldn't be shocked if Volkan got like a Jan Blachowicz, Jamal Hill matchup. It's just kind of unclear how the top of that division is going to play out. You have Magomed, you have Jan Blachowicz, you have Jamal Hill. Like, how are those matchups going to work? So maybe he gets sprung up even more. We'll wait and see. And then the final guy here, Johnny Walker. I think his next fight could be against Bogdan Guskov. This is back-to-back pretty rough knockouts for Johnny Walker. I hope he takes some time off. If he does take that time, it's tough to like confidently pick a next opponent because he's probably fighting back end of the top 15, maybe right outside the rankings. So, in 5, 6, 7 months, that could look totally different than it looks right now. But as it stands today, I think Guskov could make sense. He's coming off of back-to-back knockout wins. His most recent one was against Ryan Spann. He's currently ranked number 12, so he would be fighting up. And then also, it would just be 2 very dangerous strikers. A finish would seem, very likely in this matchup. So that's going to wrap it up for my matchmaking for the UFC Saudi Arabia main card fighters. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with these matchups? Do you have some different ideas in mind? Let me know down below. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.